You're listening to Got Your Six, Leadership Forged in Fire. I'm Dr. Traci, a retired U.S. Army officer turned business strategist. This is where I bring real talk, real leadership lessons, and battle-tested tools that shaped me as a leader and continue to shape the leaders I coach today. Each episode gives you clarity, courage, and the confidence to lead with intention. Whether the battles you face are in business, at home, or within yourself, let's lock in, get honest, and lead like it matters.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Got Your Six, the podcast where we talk about leadership, life, business, and everything in between. I'm your host, Dr. Traci. Welcome back. I wanted to remind you that while we often discuss topics involving leadership, stress, growth, resilience, personal development, and human behavior, I'm not a licensed therapist. My perspective comes from over 27 years of leadership experience in the military, government, business ownership, and coaching leaders through some of life's toughest challenges. One of the things I learned throughout my career is that most leaders spend a tremendous amount of time trying to solve external problems. We focus on systems, strategy, operations, employees, and on growth. But sometimes the thing standing in our way isn't external at all. Sometimes the biggest obstacle we carry with us every single day are the assumptions, our fears, our habits, stories, the patterns we've developed over the years that quietly influence every decision we make. Today's conversation dives directly into that topic. Today, I am joined by Dirk Horn, business growth strategist. We have so much in common. Organizational transformation consultant. I think that that's accurate. Leadership advisor. I would say he doesn't call himself that, I don't think, but I look at what he does in that way. And someone who has spent years helping organizations navigate growth, change, and human side of leadership. Dirk brings a unique perspective to this conversation because while many people focus solely on business strategy, he understands the strategy that often succeeds or fails based on mindset, behavior, intentional actions, and the people that are leading it. Dirk, welcome to Got Your Six. I think I did a decent intro, but is there anything you'd like to maybe change or add? What did I miss? Because you got a life experience, right?
I don't get to be in a situation often where someone says so many nice words about me. So I thank you for that. The one thing that I would add is you and I are both in the spot. We're chameleons in a way. It's because we're serving.
Yeah.
And that serving means that we're not coming in and say, this is the solution for you, follow my lead. Basically, we're following clients' or leaders' leads because we need to do something for them. So, and that said, I know all the pretty words that we can use to describe ourselves. I know my wife laughs about me because I always have a hard time describing what I do. But often I just say I'm a person who, for some companies, I am the psychological support. For others, I'm the strategist. And I just got out of a meeting earlier today. I'm just their diehard change manager. And over the years, I really realized it's all good because the theme that combines all of us is we want to create impact. It sounds a bit corny, but I am out to make the life better for people because I think everybody deserves to go into the workplace and have an amazing day. Of course, there are challenges, but challenges is not what makes us feel bad. It's other stuff. Have a fulfilled life and be at their best. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I truly believe in that.
Yeah, it's not cheesy at all. Actually, it's so funny because I was talking to somebody yesterday about my husband and I. We each own our own businesses, but because people say, oh, well, you travel, you do all these things, and you're probably making a lot of money. And I told them, I said, you know what's funny is we don't even look at money that way. We look at our impact. Because if we're not making an impact on other people in this world, what are we doing this for? He does digital marketing, but everything he does is to impact clients making money, right? And so if we're not doing the right things in what we're doing, giving them a voice in whatever way it is, why are we even doing this? Right? Why? I mean, it makes no sense. And that's what it's really all about. I mean, it just is. And so I love that you explain that way. And they are fancy words, but those are words that explain who you are, what you do in this world. And I appreciate, though, that you extended it to say that it's about what the people are gaining from you in the conversations that you have. Because I'm sure sometimes it's really simple conversations that you're having with people, right? And so I'm wondering, throughout your career working with organizations and leaders, you've had the opportunity to observe countless businesses trying to grow and evolve. But I'm wondering, in your own experience, what mental roadblocks are you seeing that often otherwise successful leaders prevent them from reaching the next level? What do you think that those mental roadblocks that cause people to kind of, even though they can be so successful, but kind of stick in themselves, what do you think that is?
That's how much time do we have?
Let's start with one.
Maybe I start with myself because, like you, I'm running a business. And I don't know, I was set out to say, I want to grow this business and I want to become a huge consultancy early on. And then I realized the growth never happened the way I wanted it. At least I envisioned it to happen. And the mental or emotional roadblock that I have is, and that goes back to the first comment I made earlier, is I just like the variety. I just like to be the chameleon, not comedian. It sounded the same in my head. So the chameleon. And the thing is, if you're in so many places at the same time, which is that I'm from an advisor, psychologist, and change manager, that is poison for growth. So in my headspace, I've never had an idea how I can grow because that is not possible to grow as a concept, because that basically represents who I am. So if you want to grow your business, and I'm a big Jim Collins fan, Good to Great, Built to Last, Great by Choice, amazing contributions to the world of management and business. When he described the hedgehog concept, and the hedgehog is good at one thing. Maybe there's companies that are good at two things, but the mental roadblock really is to often, what is the one thing that we're really good at, which we can replicate reliably and repeatably, which creates the foundation for scale? As interesting as enough as we do a lot of strategies with companies, and I always look for, do we have a roadblock in terms of understanding what is our USP? What is the part that we can really, have multiple people do, not just the founder, but maybe tens, hundreds or thousands of people. And it's got to be something that is simple and being able to scale and replicate. So the mental roadblock is one of the first mental roadblocks. I know that's less an emotional, but more strategic one, is we trying to be too many things at the same time because we feel like we're missing out on opportunity. But opportunity actually lies in the reduction of complexity, not in trying to offer the full menu.
That's true. That brings me to a thought to my mind that I come across often is more as the fear disguised as logic. One thing I've seen throughout my military career and working with business owners is that people often convince themselves that they're being strategic when they're actually being cautious because they're afraid of the next level. So I'm wondering, like, when you're dealing with people in that aspect, where fear comes in, like how can you tell the difference when you're working with somebody like that they're being strategically cautious or their fear is being disguised as logic because they're going in one direction or the other instead of the path that's least traveled usually?
That's an interesting concept. So typically, I have no problem with fear.
Yeah.
Because fear is also energy and a driver. So it depends how you treat your fear. So for example, I always quote movies and songs and all of this. I get inspired by this because I think there's some really good poets and also in movies and in songs. So Peter Gabriel, former singer of Genesis, and then he had a solo career, he said, I have my fears, but my fears do not have me. By the way, going back to the simple things, and by the way, I say these things on the phone, and just in case one of my kids or wives or like, they're overhearing what I say, they're always like, you say so many simple things and that makes money. And I'm like, yeah, it's all about timing.
Yeah, but it makes sense though, right?
Yeah, so I have my fears, but my fears do not have me. So that means uh, I have it is okay to fear, but they don't get the better of me in a way like they dominate me, but I'm aware. So for example, if you're I mean you have this, and we talked about this on my podcast, this amazing military career. If you go into battle without fear, I'm sorry, I haven't served in the military, but I would call you a fool. Because if you're not aware of your fears, then
Sure.
the worst things can happen. I don't know what your opinion is. I think fear can be something extremely valuable.
That is
Um,
absolutely true. And because I have gone to war several times, I think
yeah,
that if you understand your emotions behind the fear, because the bad part is when that fear takes control of you, right? And
uh,
that's the piece I was trying to pull into this was,
yes. No, I know.
yeah,
But
yeah, with, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm just saying, and that's the differentiation. So the starting point is for me, it's not to get rid of fear. It's to
Right.
understand what the fear is
Yeah.
and what it does to you, and then make decisions based on that. So the fears don't have me.
Yeah,
Um,
that's very true. Yeah, I mean, fear gets a bad reputation anyway, and that's one reason I
oh,
brought it up because a lot of
uh,
people, and I want our listeners to hear this because a lot of people, especially business owners, will get so caught up in being afraid of something that they won't move to the next level. But fear is always looked at as like a panic or terror, but fear doesn't always have to be like that, right? Exactly what you're saying.
fear is the only sole reason, Tracy, you and I are sitting here, because when we go back thousands of years, fear is something archaic. So they tell us we used to live in caves. Let's assume that's true. And
Okay.
outside of this cave, these our caves were things that would look at us as food. The fauna was a completely different one 10,000 years ago. Now, if you stepped out of your cave in the morning, you have a good morning stretch, but then some tiger who looks at you as his breakfast might spot you, you'd be gone. So without that fear that something is out to get me, I don't think that'd be a human race today. So
Yeah.
fear is something archaic that keeps us safe. So that is an important. Now the
Yeah.
issue is if we go by it, and we go to the business side of things in a bit. If
Yeah.
we go in a psychoanalytical way by this, there's something that's called the signal fear. Signal fear means there's this fear that typically gets me, let's say, out of balance. And the signal fear is that I have fear of getting that fear. This is where the fear is starting to getting the better of you. And
Yeah.
that's the cycle you need to break. Now, a business owner in principle who has fears is I would say, as a starting point, is a smart person,
Yeah.
because fear makes sure you don't step out of the cave and something's going to eat you. So that's a good thing. The real question is, how can you, and this would be the question, how can you work with your fears? In terms of how can you better understand your fear? So, for example, is your fear originating personally inside yourself because of your upbringing and who you are, or is that a real fear that the risk of losing on a certain business venture that you want to, or an investment, that is an actual fear. So there's the risk mitigation part of fear, which I think the really successful business leaders, they can differentiate between that is my personal, that is out of my personal comfort zone,
Yeah.
and that is a business risk that I fear, but I can calculate. I think that's a very, very important decision between the emotional fear and the fear that I can calculate.
I'm glad you brought that up, and especially psychologically, because I was going to say fear is really simply your brain trying to protect yourself against something that it's perceiving as a threat. And so when you think about it that way, and as you mentioned, thousands of years ago when we had to be cognizant of our surroundings constantly, shifting that to now, though, is to be able to distinguish between physical danger and emotional discomfort. Right. And so when you're thinking about whether this as a business owner or anybody else, like when you're thinking about how you're feeling and this portrayal of fear, don't look at it always as an anxiety. Is what is the potential danger behind it, right? Is this going to protect me? Should I use my protective responses like going to war? Because in that aspect, even actually adrenaline tends to take over. So fear actually disappears. So either fear takes over and you crumble, which I have experienced, which is not a pretty scenario. But most people in those scenarios, your adrenaline takes over. Really, your brain is like, forget the fear. I'm taking over for you because you're you're getting in the way right now. But sometimes I feel like this is why business owners will get stuck and not hire, because they'll say they're. And I have an actual client right now who actually hates hiring new people because they're afraid of what it's going to become, right? Well, I might hire them and they're not going to do well, or I might hire them but I'm like, well, how would you know if you're not hiring them? You need this person. So you need to get to the next time. Just put the ad out there, close your eyes and push the button, right? So you can't have fear take over, or just recognize what it's doing for you, right? Because like you're saying, fear can actually help you in some ways, right?
It does. It's, first of all, it protects you, and we should
Yeah.
never underestimate all the archaic things that happen in our bodies. You mentioned the chemical reaction, so that we produce adrenaline. That didn't just happen yesterday. This is what nature basically gave us to in adverse situations, that we would be extra functional, extra fast, extra attentive. So that's what adrenaline does. There's an interesting thing about fear, because we're always talking about letting go of fear. And here's where I've seen business leaders create the greatest value. So imagine you're holding on to something. So you do have an okay running business. It creates decent cash flow, and you have a certain position in the market. But you see there's opportunity. If you at some point in time allow yourself to let go of what you have and step into the unknown, so do that leap of faith. It doesn't always work, but I always seen that there is the greatest return if you have the courage to let go and open yourself and embrace something new. Now, an example, so Roche Pharmaceuticals, before I joined them, they sold, and they had a very well-running consumer business, including vitamins. And they felt that is holding them back and on their path to curing cancer, becoming an even more company that solves the world's health problems. They felt if we continue producing things you can buy in a drugstore or on the shelf, vitamins, headache pills, and creams and ointments, everybody freaked out when Roche decided in the early 2000s, we're going to sell this entire thing. And then we're going to focus everything we have on prescription drugs and mostly on oncology. I still remember where in the pharmaceutical industry, we were still discussing, they're crazy. What are they doing? It was a calculated bet. And they're one of the most successful financially. And when you look at the new molecular entities that coming out of this shop, is just amazing what they do, what the benefit they're providing to basically humanity is enormous. But it was a calculated bet, but it required overcoming the fear of letting something go. Like, we're successful in this business, putting all the energy onto what we feel like that's where we need to go. I wasn't part of Roche at the time, but I think there were probably a lot of conversations about fear of letting something go that works for us today.
Yeah.
As opposed to going something up and taking the leap of faith and going to something that where we feel like there's the greater opportunity.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Actually, you brought that topic up, because I was going to ask you. I know you said in me describing who you are, one of the biggest things I think, and in our conversations together, is you work with people on transformation and growth and a lot of the things that they're doing. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to actually ask you in some of the in the concept of fear, even because transformation and growth is so scary sometimes, right? And it is actually what holds people back a lot. So that's really great to hear that they did that. But what do you think that some organizations stay stuck in, like, reaction mode instead of being proactive in that aspect? That's what made me think of it. That is so proactive, to be forward thinking in that way, and getting rid of fear. What do you think that causes some businesses to stay in that reactive mode? Circling back to fear, but outside of that, do you see anything in these conversations of transformational and growth with other companies?
So, and then I don't know if that's controversial, but I think the worst thing that ever happened to decent management is quarterly reportings. If you need to report every quarter, basically everything you do is geared towards showing good numbers every quarter. So this means there is a constant fear of risking something that will jeopardize your next quarter. Now, when we, and I just mentioned back to Jim Collins, but there's lots of other science around this, or owner-driven companies, they don't act out of fear what the next quarter looking like. They act out of fear what the next 10 years will look like.
Yeah.
So I think this is what keeps a lot of organizations in the current fears, not necessarily in the first place a psychological thing. It is, if you ask me, it is because success needs to become immediately, or there's consequences, and there's dire consequences. If the share price goes down 10%, your market cap is $1 billion, that's 100 million less market cap. I think that's the one thing that's holding back. In my experience, because I love to be in the thick of it, right within the organization, the willingness to change, which we've always said is the issue. And that's interesting. I don't see this to that extent that it's always being propagated, that people are not willing to change. I see a great interest, at least, if we show people the path to changing and what changing means. And there's change methodology. The last 25 years, the business community has developed very, very viable ways to driving change. The resistance we're always talking about, I never perceive this as the main issue. The main issue is that a lot of corporations are just not geared or qualified to drive change. Naturally, because they're there to sell iPhones. They're there to produce glasses. Changing and transformation is a separate skill. That's one of the issues why they're stuck. And here's the thing, of course, that's Traci, that's our business model. And of course, we're basically, I'm stating we're so important for organizations, but here's the thing, it's my pledge to all the organizations. Focus on what you're best at. And when it comes to transforming the place, get an expert in, because it's a skill by itself. Right. Don't try to do it with your own people, because your own people have a different programming.
Yes, I was actually just going to say that and circling once again back to fear, is that a lot of times people are afraid to bring in a consultant or afraid to bring these people in. But what they're not recognizing, I mean, it even took my husband years to finally ask me for help, and we talk all the time. But the thing is because they feel that they need to have all the answers, right? So I think that I love that you brought up the concept of quarterly reviews. I love that concept because even in the military, we did something after every mission, even training things. We did something called an after action review, which is very similar to quarterly reviews, right? And we didn't just ask, did we complete the mission? Because yes, no, in between. We asked what worked, what didn't, what should we sustain, what should we improve? But I teach this to businesses now, and they never know what the heck it is. But the thing it does highlight is bringing somebody in from the outside that's not in the minutia to be able to see, right?
Yes.
To be able to see what is happening outside of, these business owners or even senior managers, CEOs, COOs, you get them involved and allow them to see beyond themselves sometimes, right? And enhancing that by bringing somebody in, and this isn't just to promote us, right? But bringing somebody in, but on the outside, right? That has the ability to see things in a way that people in the minutia don't always see. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I agree 100%. So two things maybe. There's this, I'm German originally, as most can hear from my English. There's this legendary German nobleman and who had famously telling wildly exaggerated stories. So it's a story that at least every kid in my age knows. It's the Baron Münch, like Count Baron Münchhausen. And one of his stories was one day he got stuck in the mud, which happened at the time. And then because there was no one to help around, he pulled himself out of the mud on his own hair.
Mm.
So this is kind of, which is physically not possible.
Right.
Technically not possible. But that's when I see companies focused on what they do best and they get stuck in the mud, they try to pull themselves out with their own resources. That's just, this is not like a doomsday warning scenario, get your consultant in. This is more like, if you have the folks who have transformation experience, and very well some companies do, people who have done turnarounds, let those people do the change because they've done it before. If you don't have those people, get them from the outside. This is, you need that turnaround skill, because it's not possible just to pull yourself out of the mud. So that energy for renewal is a big point. And by the way, that is very much connected to fear. Because if you surrender your fear, I mean, here's the thing, Tracy. If you surrender to your fear, there's no way out of this. So there's surrendering to fear is never an option. The really key point is, how can you translate the energy that's in fear? It's thermodynamics. Energy has never been, it's always the same amount. It's just what you can do is directed.
Sure.
How can you capture and direct the energy that's in the organism, the energy to fail, and transform it into a positive energy?
That's very true. I was just going to say transformation primarily, it gets mixed up whether it's strategy or leadership. And in essence, isn't it both? Right. And then to take the ownership of that transformation and turn it into something else. Right. Either bringing somebody in or looking at your company or looking. I mean, because sometimes what I find, because I do work with a lot of senior managers also, and I do a lot of training with them, even senior managers, because especially like CEOs, COs, they're there to help the business owner enhance and understand what that business is doing, what it can do. But sometimes they get so stuck in the strategy that they don't ever tell the business, or because they're afraid it might not be what the business owner wants. But that's where I think leadership ties into that, and owning the work that you're doing or should be doing, and getting rid of the fear, actually, because if you don't, in those positions, as you know, if you're not helping to make that change, even if you can't make it yourself and make recommendations, you're going to be getting stuck in where the accountability lies. Before a leader can effectively lead change in anyone else, they have to often address their own internal challenges first, right? To be able to enhance that with somebody else. And so when a leader begins removing their own mental roadblocks in this scenario before attempting to lead transformation in their company or organization, I'm wondering how you feel about what practices could somebody do to create greater self-awareness. Do you have any ideas on that we could help our listeners with? What practices could create greater self-awareness in that? And whether they're a manager, whether they're regular level employee even, because sometimes they can enhance the work to go up, right?
Yes. You said something that we take for granted, but it's been actually debated over the last 15, 20 years, is the role of the leader. Actually, just like 10, 15 years ago, we were looking at the idea of the leaderless future. There's an orchestra in New York, they're playing without a conductor. So I remember the companies that I worked for taking us through the case studies. We talked about swarm intelligence, collective intelligence, and all of these sorts of things. They're all good. We're all working with those. But implicit in what you just said is that it starts with the leader.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to get criticized for this. I'm a big fan in leadership, and I have never seen, and I'm happy if someone of your listeners gives me another example. I've never seen a true transformation that did not start at the top and was promoted and sponsored from the top. It would require people that are fearless, but stupidly fearless. If they were revolting against the system, imagine the accounting department just decides, no, we're going to do this differently. Or a few accountants or a few salespeople say, no, I'm not going after company policy. I'm not following the code of conduct because I think there's better ways to do this. Imagine that sort of mayhem if we had change originating in the belly of the organization, not at the top. Quick question. What happens to those people that step out of line? What do we do with those people?
Well, they generally get fired.
Yeah. And they get fired. That's what I call the corporate immune system. Yeah. So if there's some wiggle room to the sides where we allow people some leeway, but in principle, we want them to behave. We don't want them to reinvent the entire place. Right. But when the company needs that, if people at the bottom start with that, they are actually risking their jobs.
Yeah.
So that needs, and I'm sorry for using that, they would need fearless idiots. Because here's the thing, you don't win anything if you get fired for it. So that's where I'm a big proponent of saying true transformation starts at the top. If we want to turn out, of course, we need to find fast ways to get everyone on board, make sure everybody perceives it as their own story and they buy in. But they can only buy in if they're protected. If you change your behavior, you want to make sure that you don't get in trouble for changing your behavior. So and now comes the mindset shift on the top.
Yeah.
The mindset shift on the top is to understand that you need to change and you need to create a safe space. And then here's the funny psychological safety for your people to behave differently. So you probably need to change your own expectations as to how your organization works.
Yeah.
So you've always, so for example, at the moment, everybody is complaining about reports. Reports are retrospective and it takes a lot of resources. Now, executives love their reports.
So
A forward future looking organization, and especially in the day and age of AI, would say, here's the thing. The AI does all the reports, and then whatever reports need the executive has, let them work with the AI, but free up the organization's resources that they don't look back, but look forward. That would require a mindset shift on the executive's end.
that's true.
But
That's
they love their reports. They love their reports, and then ideally on a slide deck that is not just some words on a blank page, but it's got to be in corporate design. It's got to be beautiful. There's a lot of effort that goes into reports, into looking back. Now, getting executives to understand that this is something that holds their organization back because 20% of the organization is busy with looking back, sometimes even more. That's a mindset shift that needs to happen in the head of the leader. I'm just giving one example. I could give you tons. Oh, maybe I am easing up on the reports, on the looking back. I need to understand what I really need, and I need to allow my organization to move into a different direction. That's a mindset shift. And that the general answer to your question is, what can leaders do? It's all about awareness. Where do I have my comfort zone? And then questioning and challenging myself, is this really beneficial for the business, or is this me personally who wants this?
I mean, one of the biggest mindset shifts that leaders need to make a lot of times is understanding that reporting, I'm so glad you brought up reporting, but isn't always about the accountability for someone else, right? And creating visibility, but they're constantly getting stuck in what's behind us. Again, circling back to the military, because this was most of my life.
Yeah.
We created reports constantly, and it wasn't because someone wanted another document. The way we reported things was accurate information of what's happening today, actually. And so I think that in business, exactly what you're saying, the report isn't objective all the time because it has to do with the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last month, or even the last quarter. My God, how many times do people sit in meetings to talk about the last quarter? Now, if they're taking that to make awareness of what can happen tomorrow for forecasting, as an example, then it makes a difference. That's where I personally feel like some of that shift needs to happen is who are we reporting to and what are they going to take from it, right? What decision does this report help? Right. I think that that's where the piece is missing when we do reporting is yeah, I love reports. Actually, I do love reports, but I tend to take a
Oh,
report from somebody and I look at what is it doing for tomorrow? What is the forecast for the next quarter? Right. I don't want
yes.
to spend a lot of time talking about the last quarter. Give me the important things in the 5-second report so I can look at what do we do for the next quarter to improve, to help somebody to do the next thing, to grow, whatever it is. But I think that that's really the biggest piece that's the difference, I think, in military and in business life a lot of times, or in the civilian world, is we get stuck on the past. I mean, would you agree with that?
I agree 100% with this. And I don't say we got to abandon reports. Reports are necessary.
Oh, yeah.
The thing is, most leaders today grew up in a different world.
Yeah.
This is the old industrial world. We have fortunately the next generation coming up. So they grew up with in a world of reports, in the world of looking into the past, because the future was basically more or less predictable. I believe we live in the craziest times, at least in my lifetime, because I'm pretty sure that by it is June 30th now. I don't know when this is broadcasted, but it is 2026. But in a year from now, we will probably have a couple of completely new AI models that everyone's raving about with
Yeah.
completely different skill sets and functionalities. And at some point, we're going to be like Claude who? ChatGPT, who we all were trained and grew up in a time where there was comparable today, there was stability. So Windows had an update, I don't know, every 5 years, and we knew whenever the update comes, our computers won't work anymore. But there were things that we could expect. And so in that area, that required a certain management style. Now, my question really is, reports is one thing, but there's other aspects. Today's managers, how can we help them, and what can they do to really understand, okay, that is my upbringing as a manager, and that was functional 25 years ago, 20 years ago. Now, I'm confronted with a completely different challenge now. What do I need to do differently or look at differently to deal with the challenges that we have today? If I try to solve here's the thing, if I try to solve a data issue today with Excel, I don't think people do it anymore, but I'm just using it as a fun example. If I try to do that with Excel, that clearly means I'm trying to solve an issue of today with the tools of the past.
Yeah.
And that is easier said than done. That needs to start with the leader to understand what paradigm I am sitting in. What are my core beliefs that I operate on? And having that conversation with you, yourself, and I, or your coach, or your wife, or your husband, or anyone. It's very hard to do it for yourself, to understand what is the limitation of my perspective that I naturally have. And that process, this is where the value starts. If you start as a leader, if you start reflecting on exactly this, am I still using Excel in a world where AI models outpace Excel, I don't know, 10,000 fold?
It's actually funny that you brought that up. I was talking to another client last week, and she said her HR person will not, well, it's like HR, but she also does finances a little bit for them. And she will not stop using Excel. She wants to, but she's emailing them. Then the husband, who is never in the office, he's always out, and then he has to get the document. He sends the changes. He goes, I said, why don't you just use a Google Sheet? That way, anybody who needs to access it can make the change right in there, and then she can get the document right away. And she was like, well, she's stuck in the past. I was like, I'm going to need her to move to the future.
Yeah. And I love that example because it comes down to really some of the basics.
Yeah.
Even when you're managing a 50,000 people company, if it's also about the basics.
Yeah.
So and even for top management. And so that is what I'd say to answer your on the bigger arch, your question. So what can managers actually do is they need to start with themselves and understand, what did I grow up in? What are my core beliefs? And are these helpful in this day and age? So that's kind of where I'd start with. And here's the positive outlook. All the senior leaders that I work with are basically doing this. I don't say that they're really good at it, or that they're constantly doing it, or that they challenge themselves enough, but that is something that everyone who reaches at a certain level has understood. It's about the self-awareness and the consequences out of that.
Yeah.
So that's the positive note. So we're
Yeah.
not starting from scratch.
No, no, not at all. And in fact, every single day, things are enhancing around us. The thing is we have to keep up with it and not get stuck with, what did we do before? What can we do in the future? Hence me loving to forecast things all the time.
Well,
Yeah.
Interesting enough, and here again comes fear and maybe bravery. Sometimes concepts pop up, and I've had the funniest, toughest conversations about, should we pursue this one or not? For example, in Europe, and that was basically, I think, German industry related, there was something that came up 10, 15 years ago where they mixed industry, digitalization, so everything in one bucket, and they called it Industry 4.0. And that became a thing. And because I never work in Germany, I just go there for one client. But other than that, I'm in all other countries but Germany. I'm like, that thing doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
Industry 4.0, this is like a local thing. Don't think it's the next thing, number one. Number two is, first of all, if you're doing it alone without the world market, this thing's going to die. Don't pour your resources into it. And frankly enough, is now, I think no one talks about it anymore. So that there was a fear at the time to say, oh, everybody around me, my peers, are doing Industry 4.0. And then comes Dirk in and says, you don't need to.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't do that. I had a very interesting controversial discussions around this. And this is if your local group pursues something, and of course you don't follow that, you have a fear of missing out. Classic FOMO.
Oh, yeah.
And there could be another takeaway for us here. I'm making this up as we go, apparently. Exposure. You have to get out and see what's happening in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
There are local phenomena like the Industry 4.0 in Germany, and there's a few others. There was a time when companies thought that agile, which originated, so agile, Scrum, sprints, all of this, which originated in IT, that this is gonna turn entire companies into an agile culture. And I'm like, I don't see that happening. I just don't see it. And it didn't happen.
When I retired from the Army and I went and I worked as a civilian in special forces, but then I went and worked at the FBI headquarters. They used Agile very often. The Army started using Agile before I retired. It drove me crazy because those two entities are both governmental entities and they don't move quickly, right? And so you get stuck in the Agile process because they don't move anywhere. So you're having these meetings, the Scrum, all the things. It drove me nuts. It literally did. So,
and I still see it. It survives in IT for very good reasons. And apparently the IT world prevent a lot of loss. That's what Agile was originally, but it's never made it onto the big stage. And I think that fear of missing out, oh, now we're Industry 4.0, now we're Agile, now we do this and that.
Yeah.
That fear of missing out can be compensated if top managers get more exposure. For example, allow yourself to get more exposure to different industries, different geographies also. Every country more or less has its own paradigm of how business is being done. And in Europe, it's very apparent because everything's very close to each other, but we have that in the United States as well, Canada too. You need to leave that geography to understand what's happening in the world.
I talk about that all of the time with people. Get out of what you're comfortable with, right? Get out of that comfort zone, get in something else, jump in the pool, just do it. But since we're getting to the top of the hour, Dirk, before we wrap, I always like to leave our listeners with something practical. Now, we did talk about a lot of things. So if our listeners forget everything else we've talked about today, what do you think that we can leave with them that they can walk away with today to encourage for them to start doing today as a senior manager, as a business owner, just somebody in this world that's listening to what we're talking about as leaders? What can we leave with them to change today?
It's semi-related to our conversation, but it's more along the lines that I try to teach people basically and inspire people for. The one thing is, whatever your business is, whatever your product is, it's a commodity. If that's not the case, I would really challenge you to show me, because everywhere I look, every product I've seen, even in B2B, every product is a commodity. There's always an alternative to you. Your customers can go to competitors, and the competitors are at least as good as you are. The only consequence for you and your business to survive in the future is to create a relationship with your customers that your customers think twice about going to the competition because they have such a great relationship with you.
Yes, I love that actually. Using the word commodity, a lot of people don't even use that word anymore. But I think in leadership, that is such an important concept to utilize. I love that you ended with that. I think that I hope anyway that people will consider that and how they can use that. Because earlier you mentioned these decisions and things come from the top, because if you're at the lower level, you're at risk of getting removed from the company or whatever it is. But so many times companies will ask lower level employees, do you have ideas or suggestions, right? I think this is even where commodity can come in. Look at your position, whatever it is, and see how you can have that commodity, how you are a commodity in that company, even at that aspect. And if they're asking for advice or suggestions, think about how you're giving that advice, right? And I think that that's a big piece that we didn't bring up before I got distracted by something, is that sometimes there are employees that do have great ideas, and a lot of times they're afraid to say anything, right? And so what I just recommend in that is look at how you're going to make that suggestion, to be aware of the fact that you could lose your position because you're recommending it in a way that might shift or change what that business really needs or wants. So I love the word commodity. Thank you for sharing that. This has been such a powerful conversation, Dirk. One of the biggest takeaways for me is that leadership isn't just operational. The things we just talked about and the things that we just discussed, I think that it really hones in on leadership being deeply personal, no matter what level we're at in life. I think that this has just been a great conversation, Dirk. I feel like I'm going to have you on again at some point because we collaborate so well with a lot of things. I just want to really say thank you for being on with me today. Thank you for sharing all of your insight and your knowledge and the things that you bring to the table for your clients. Even though we do similar work, I think that we bring it in a different way, a different perspective. So I really, really appreciate you being here and you sharing this with our audience. Is there anything else you would like to add before we go?
I really appreciate the opportunity. I live in this world where typically I take a step back and give the spotlight to someone else, and that's the serving aspect. And I enjoy that a lot. And as I grow older, finally, I enjoy taking that step back and allowing others to run the stage. Today, you gave me an hour of me being on the stage, and I very much appreciated that opportunity. So thanks for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. I know that our listeners are really going to appreciate that. I have a few in my mind that I know that listen to my podcast without a shadow of a doubt. So I know this is going to be so helpful. Thank you, Dirk, for being on with us today. And thank you for all of your insights. And I hope I get to see you soon. I'm going to wonder what's going on in the world of Dirk in a few weeks. And so
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to share. Tracy, thank you very, very much.
thank you so much. That was such a great conversation with Dirk. Real leadership requires the courage to look inward and ask ourselves whether we are contributing to the very challenges we are trying to solve. And sometimes those things aren't comfortable, just like we discussed today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment, subscribe, follow, and share the podcast with somebody who could benefit from this conversation. Every download, every share, every review helps us reach to leaders who need these messages. And as always, I want you to look at the show notes, look at the lounge, look at the membership groups, see what we're offering. I really want to make sure that we're in this together. As always, leadership is not about perfection. It's about progress. It's about showing up. It's about doing the work. And it's about having the courage to lead when it matters most. Until next time, y'all, I've got your 6.
Leadership isn't found in comfort. It's forged in fire. Life will test you. When you create stability through your choices, you don't just calm the chaos, you build momentum. Stay steady, stay strong, be decisive, and most of all, lead with intention. And remember, I've got your 6.